Welcome to the deep dive. We're jumping straight into the engine room today, our mission. Really getting into the nitty-gritty, extracting that high-value knowledge you need to build predictable, scalable business growth. We're aiming to move past just hoping for growth and actually build a machine. And here's the thing, the status quo problem. When growth stalls, and it often does, most leaders, well, they fall back on what you might call boiler room 101.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? They just tell the team, make more calls, send more emails. It's all about activity. We end up measuring busyness,
Yes.
not, actual productivity.
And that is the core mistake right there.
Yeah.
Activity without a real system behind it, it's just noise. It doesn't get you anywhere predictable. The real goal, the thing we should be aiming for, is creating a predictable pipeline. You simply cannot predict revenue if you don't have a repeatable system for creating those new opportunities. And what's kind of shocking here, when you actually build a disciplined, systematic strategy, especially if you focus it on cold outreach, it commonly sources upwards of 70% of new deals. 70%.
70%. Wow. Okay, that number tells us two things, right? First, the opportunity is massive. But second, it must mean most companies are, getting this pretty wrong. Otherwise, everyone would just be scaling effortlessly.
Exactly. They get it wrong because they mistake effort for structure. They confuse being busy with actually producing results. So today, we are going to unpack how you can stop chasing that busyness and start building a genuinely specialized revenue engine. And we'll do that by looking at system design, building specialized teams, and using focused financial measurement, not just activity tracking.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If this predictable pipeline we're talking about comes mainly from that aggressive outbound effort, that 70% number you mentioned, why can't we just train outbound leads like, extra inbound leads?
Yeah.
Where do things get really different? Because right now you see it everywhere. Most places just lump all their sales development reps, their SDRs, together in one bucket.
Right. And the danger there isn't just operational, like mixing up tasks. It's actually cultural and behavioral. It's deeper. See, when companies get used to a steady flow of inbound leads, we sometimes call this the inbound party, the sales team, they can get a bit complacent. They become what we might call fat with leads, easy leads, and they stop sharpening those crucial prospecting skills. They don't have to.
Ah, okay. So they develop sort of sloppy habits because the leads coming in are already warm, already interested from the start.
Precisely. And here's the hard truth. The inbound party always plateaus. Always. It slows down eventually. Market changes, competition increases, whatever. When that happens, the team suddenly has to pivot to outbound, and honestly, they are completely unprepared. Unprepared for the level of effort, the different kind of discipline it takes to convert a truly cold prospect versus someone who already raised their hand.
So treating them the same is basically setting yourself up for disaster when the market shifts or the inbound dries up. Okay, what are the really practical day-to-day differences then that make outbound this different beast, as you called it?
You absolutely must treat inbound and outbound as two separate specialized engines. They are not just extensions of each other. Think about the whole sales motion from start to finish. Inbound leads, typically they result in shorter sales cycles, sometimes smaller deals too, more transactional maybe. They come to you pretty much knowing they have a problem they think you might solve. Outbound leads, though, they're often bigger, maybe enterprise deals. They definitely have longer sales cycles. And the conversion rates, totally different. Distinct.
I see. So the entire math of the business, the economics, actually changes depending on where that lead came from.
It really does. But maybe the biggest difference, the most immediate one, is that very first conversation. If an inbound lead calls you, they might be asking for a product demo straight away. They've looked at your website, they know your product, roughly. But for a cold outbound prospect, that initial call is almost never about the product itself. It's got to be about business discovery. And frankly, about selling the dream. You have to spend that entire first discussion digging into their key business pain points and painting this really vivid picture of how their life or their business could look if that pain just disappeared.
That initial connection sounds like much harder work. Okay, so if the conversation is different, the customer profile is different, the sales cycle is different, you're basically suggesting that everything from the actual process steps to maybe even how you pay people has to be specialized too.
Absolutely, 100%. The ideal outbound customer profiles you target, the specific sequence of steps in your outreach process, the roles you assign people, and crucially, yes, the compensation plans. It all has to be specialized just for outbound. An outbound rep needs a fundamentally different mindset, different skills, and different incentives than someone who's mostly just processing warm leads that fall in their lap.
Okay, let's talk metrics then. Where does this lack of specialization usually show up in the data? in the numbers?
The single biggest data error we see time and time again is executives lumping inbound and outbound metrics together, just putting it all in one sales development report. If you measure them together, what happens is the naturally higher performance of your successful inbound funnel will always mask the big problems, the gross deficiencies in your outbound prospecting process. You completely lose accountability, you lose visibility into what's really working and what isn't.
Ah, that almost sounds like, I don't know, corporate accounting fraud, but for sales performance. You're hiding the bad numbers behind the good ones.
That's actually a really good analogy. It's exactly what it is. To build predictable revenue, you need that clear visibility into every single step, which, brings us back nicely to this idea of a revenue assembly line.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
Manufacturing sales opportunities, like building widgets on a line.
Exactly. If you want predictable revenue, you need a predictable pipeline. Think about a factory assembly line. It's built on consistent, measurable stages. Each step is tracked. Just like a typical sales process has stages, right? Qualified, demo, proposal, closed. Well, the prospecting process needs similar, clearly defined, measurable stages to track movement and progress. Stages like initial research, first contact attempt, positive reply received, meeting booked. You absolutely have to track the conversion rates between those specific prospecting stages.
Okay, so the focus is really on forward movement and keeping it simple, especially in those early outreach stages. So if we're doing, say, a mass email campaign or some cold outreach, what's the ultimate simple goal? Is it booking a demo right away?
No, keep it super simple. The goal of every single piece of mass outreach needs to be just establishing contact and closing the prospect onto one clear next step. That's it. And that next step should be very narrow. We actually suggest only two possible options, really. One, simply confirming you've got the best point of contact, or maybe getting a referral to the right person within their organization. Or two, setting up a quick, maybe 15-minute discussion just to confirm that business pain we talked about. See if there's a real problem there. You are not selling the product at this stage. You're selling the meeting. You're selling the movement to the next stage on that assembly line. If you try to achieve too much in that first touch, like get a meeting and do a demo and ask about budget thing, you just dilute the focus. The whole campaign becomes less effective, probably fails.
Movement, simplicity, and measurable stages. Got it. So we're separating the inbound and outbound engines and making that prospecting process look like a manufacturing flowchart. Very clear. Right? We've established that outbound needs its own specialized assembly line. Makes total sense. Now, the next logical step. Well, we have to staff that machine. Who are the right people for this? And maybe more importantly, what's the optimal team structure look like? So we're not setting these folks up for failure right out of the gate.
Yeah, you need deliberate team development here. It's not just throwing bodies at the problem. The structure that seems to work really well, the successful one, usually comes into play after that initial startup chaos. We often call this phase 3 growth. This is that stage where, the company has basically proven product market fit, they have some existing revenue coming in, but now they need to shift gears into scalable, systematic growth. At that specific point, the basic structure that really works well for pipeline creation and closing, it often evolves to about 4 people in the core sales function. Typically, that looks like 2 SDR sales development reps who are focused purely on creating that pipeline, generating qualified opportunities, and then 2 account executives, or AEs, focused purely on closing the opportunities that the SDRs create.
Wait a second. A 1-to-1 ratio, 2 SDRs for 2 AEs, that sounds, pretty expensive, especially for an early-stage growth company. Why not try, say, a 1-to-3 ratio? Have one really good SDR feeding 3 closers. What's the concrete danger of having too many AEs chasing too few sourced leads?
Yes, the 1.3 ratio. That's a very common trap people fall into. Seems efficient on paper, but when you staff too many AEs relative to your actual proven prospecting capabilities, 2 really bad things tend to happen. First, the AEs starve. They don't get enough quality leads to hit their numbers. This leads to frustration, high turnover, and basically wasted salary dollars. Second, and maybe even worse, the SDRs get put under impossible pressure to deliver quantity over quality. Just get leads, any leads. This inevitably ruins the quality of your pipeline, floods it with unqualified junk, and over time, it really damages the long-term reputation of your business. Nobody wants to talk to the company that spams them with irrelevant stuff. That 1.1 ratio, or maybe 1.2 at the absolute most, it helps ensure quality leads flow through, keeps AE morale high because they can actually succeed, and it creates measurable accountability for everyone.
That's a really crucial insight. Manage the morale and the quality by managing the lead scarcity, essentially. Don't overstaff the closers.
Okay.
Now, when we're hiring these, say, 4 foundational people, the SDRs and AEs, what should we be prioritizing? Is it specific skills or is it
Totally.
something deeper?
You absolutely must weigh values and inherent abilities much, much more heavily than specific skills learned in a previous job. Skills, especially software skills or basic sales techniques, those can be taught relatively quickly. But things like innate curiosity, that internal drive, resourcefulness, emotional intelligence, that stuff is much, much harder to instill if it's not already there. You really need to look for people who demonstrate that inner sparkle, that intellectual curiosity, that desire to figure things out, not just people who check the boxes because they've technically done the job before somewhere else. And this is especially true, I think, for that account executive role. We need to develop reps who are fundamentally business people who can sell, not just traditional salespeople.
Okay, unpack that a bit. What does a business person who can sell actually look like in practice? How are they different?
Well, they need to operate almost like strategic consultants to the prospect. They have to be genuine experts who know exactly how your product or service impacts the customer's bottom line, their P&L statement, their labor costs, their operational efficiency, the real business stuff. And crucially, they must know when your product is not a good fit and be willing, brave enough to actually say so to the prospect. That builds enormous trust incredibly quickly, far more trust than someone who's just pushing features regardless of fit. They're selling the overall business outcome, the solution to the pain, not just the widget itself.
That makes sense. But how do you accelerate that kind of deep business expertise? Usually that level of insight takes years of experience to build up.
You actually slow down initially to speed up later. It's a bit counterintuitive. We strongly recommend ramping up a new salesperson by rotating them through different parts of the company before they even start full-time selling. Put them in customer support for maybe a month. Let them hear the real problems. Put them in product development for a month. See how things get built. And definitely put them in account management, talking to your existing clients for a month. Let them understand the long-term value and challenges, slowing down their official start on full-time selling to give them this kind of hands-on, company-wide experience. It radically accelerates their time to achieving true business expertise later on. They understand the entire life cycle of the customer problem, not just the sales pitch. And that makes them far, far more effective, especially in complex sales environments.
That is a brilliant tactic for building a really high utility team. Okay, let's pivot slightly to motivation and compensation. You mentioned earlier the danger of putting a sales team on commission too early. Why is that specific timing so toxic?
Because if you put them on commission when your goals are still basically just a guess, before you have reliable data coming off that assembly line we talked about, you unintentionally create this really damaging no-win cycle for everyone. Think about it. If the team somehow succeeds wildly, blows the arbitrary targets out of the water, what happens? Management often panics. Oh no, we're paying out too much commission. So, quotas immediately get jacked way up for the next period, and sometimes commission rates even get decreased. This completely frustrates the reps who actually outperformed. They feel punished for succeeding, and if they fail to meet those arbitrary goals, well, then they just feel punished and demoralized for missing targets that were probably unrealistic in the first place. Either way, you harm the relationship, you destroy motivation, and you seriously erode trust between sales and management. You really have to wait until your predictable pipeline data can clearly dictate realistic, achievable sales goals.
Right. The goals themselves need to be data-driven and predictable, not just pulled out of thin air.
Right, okay. So once they are selling and hopefully hitting realistic goals, let's go back to the pitch itself for a moment. We said earlier the focus needs to be on those high levels of business pain. How should the salesperson actually structure that conversation? What's the flow?
The conversation's true purpose, especially in these specialized B2B or SaaS environments, it's really to create new value for the customer. It's not primarily about just describing your product features. It's about shifting the prospect's understanding of their own reality and what's possible. The salesperson's job is to help the prospect co-create this vision of a dream solution. A world where their key business pain is completely solved, maybe even in ways they hadn't realized were possible before talking to you. Then, and really only then, do you carefully connect your product or service directly to their specific key business issues, positioning it as the clear path to achieving that dream vision. The core focus throughout has to be on ensuring absolute comprehension. Does the prospect truly understand the depth of their pain and the potential of the solution you're discussing?
So the pitch is much less about the product specs, the speeds and feeds, and much more about their future potential and deeply understanding their specific current suffering.
Precisely. And in that kind of environment where you're acting more like a consultant, you also need to gauge their sincerity, their real commitment. And here's a slightly non-obvious rule. Try to avoid showing too much eagerness yourself. Don't seem desperate for the deal. In fact, you should probably gently challenge the prospect. Ask them things like, how serious are you really about solving this expensive challenge right now? Or are you truly ready as an organization to make a significant change to address this? This kind of challenge forces them to commit psychologically to themselves and to you before you start investing significant resources in trying to close them.
Okay, this is great. We've built the specialized process, the assembly line. We've staffed the team with these specialized business experts, not just salespeople. Now, this is where, for me, the rubber really meets the road. Measurement. How do we move beyond just looking at generic revenue metrics and start using data that actually tells us if this whole machine is accelerating, if it's working efficiently?
Right. We need to anchor every single hire and really every deal back to the hard financial reality of the business. Let's start with setting a clear financial bar for an account executive. A good salesperson is a significant investment, right? Salary, commission, benefits, overhead. They absolutely must generate a clear, measurable return on that investment. The standard goal, the rule of thumb we often use, is that a salesperson should be bringing in somewhere between 3 to 5 times their total compensation package. That's salary plus expected commission. So, for example, if their total expected compensation is, say, $150,000 annually, they need to be bringing in at least $450,000, maybe up to $600,000 or even more in annual contract value, or ACV. That provides really clear, immediate financial accountability for that role. Are they paying for themselves and then some?
That's a very clean, simple metric for measuring the ROI of the human capital involved. Makes sense. But you warned earlier that focusing only on revenue, or even just ACV, can be dangerous. Why is it so critical that the sales team also focuses on gross margin and contribution margin instead? What's the risk?
This is a really crucial point that management often misses, frankly. Revenue by itself can often be a vanity metric if the cost required to deliver that revenue is too high. Think about it. If the sales team is only focused on hitting a raw revenue volume target, what will they instinctively do? They'll naturally default to things like price adjustments or maybe excessive discounts just to win the deal and hit the number. Even worse, they might start selling deals that require way too much customization or too much expensive labor to implement or too much ongoing service and support. Things the company isn't really set up to deliver profitably. That kind of pressure, selling low margin or hard to deliver deals, it puts unbearable stress on your operations team, your delivery team, your support team. And it does it without generating enough margin to actually sustain the business long term.
Wow. So they could literally be selling deals that look good on the top-line revenue report, but are actually eroding the overall profitability of the company.
That's exactly right. Gross margin, or GM, that's your revenue minus the direct cost of goods sold. That's a start. But contribution margin, or CM, is often even more important for sales accountability because it subtracts the variable costs associated with delivering that specific deal. Sales needs to be incentivized to sell what the company does best, which typically correlates directly to the highest margin of most standardized products or services you offer. Gross margin and contribution margin, those are the true top line of a healthy, scalable business, not just raw revenue.
That distinction feels absolutely vital. Okay, now let's dive even deeper into the cost side, specifically the labor metrics. These seem like the core costs tied to delivering that margin. We need specific tools here. You mentioned something called the efficiency ratios. Can you explain those?
Yes. These ratios are critical for ensuring that your growth is not just happening, but happening efficiently and sustainably. The first one we use is the direct labor efficiency ratio, or DLER for short. This ratio tracks the amount of gross margin dollars your company earns for every single direct labor dollar spent on your delivery or service team, the people actually doing the work for the customer. Let's use a quick example to make it concrete. Say your company sets a target DLER of $3.20. What that means is, for every dollar you spend on paying your direct labor force, you expect the company to generate $3.20 in gross margin from their work. Now imagine you track this ratio over time, maybe quarterly, and you see it starts climbing. It goes up to, say, $3.80, then $4. What does that signal to management?
Okay, if it's climbing, that means our frontline staff is getting more efficient, or maybe they're overworked. They're bringing in $4 in margin for every $1 spent on them. So they're generating huge margin dollars relative to their cost, but perhaps they're stretched thin, under-resourced.
Exactly. You nailed it. The action step for management becomes pretty clear. You probably need to relieve that pressure. How? By adding new personnel to the team, or maybe by giving well-deserved raises to the existing high performers. The DLER gives you the data to justify that investment, to balance the labor costs against the operational workload and the margin generated. Conversely, if that DLER starts to drop, say, below the $3.20 target, then management needs to dig in. They need to evaluate things like training, maybe the internal processes, or potentially even the quality of the deals or leads the sales team is bringing in. Are they selling stuff that's hard to deliver efficiently?
Okay, so the DLER provides direct financial accountability for the frontline delivery teams. What about management overhead? All those layers can get expensive too. We need to keep our leadership efficient as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's where the management labor efficiency ratio, or MLER, comes into play.
hmm
This ratio is used a bit differently. It functions more like a guardrail or a cap. You typically use it to establish a sensible salary cap for any new management hires you're considering bringing on. And you base that cap on the historical high performance of your current, hopefully lean management structure. Essentially, it helps prevent management overhead, manager salaries, systems they need, extra layers of bureaucracy from growing faster than the overall contribution margin of the business can actually support. Keeps things in balance.
These ratios sound incredibly powerful because they really force every team, from sales closing the deals to service delivering them, right up to leadership. It forces everyone to tie their existence, their budget, directly back to measurable financial contribution to the company's health.
Precisely. They create a culture of real financial accountability, not just activity accountability.
Okay, great. Let's shift focus slightly now to the back end of that assembly line, keeping the customers we work so hard to win. Retention. Once we land these deals using our specialized experts and focused outreach, how do we make sure they actually stick around? How do we break through that really common subscription growth ceiling, where customer churn just cancels out all the hard work of new sales?
Yes. This is another area where there's a common, slightly counterintuitive truth at play. And it's this. Retention and perceived value are not directly correlated in the way most people think.
Wait, hold on. Are you seriously saying that adding new features or delivering more services is somehow pointless? Doesn't the customer need some value to stay?
Oh, they absolutely need value. Don't get me wrong. The core product has to work and deliver on its promise. But simply piling on more complexity, adding more and more features, what we sometimes call empty calories, that doesn't automatically guarantee retention. Often, the customer is simply overwhelmed by it all, or confused. They don't even know about half the stuff you've added. The reason they often leave isn't necessarily a lack of potential value in your offering, but rather a failure of comprehension or motivation on their part. They don't understand how to use it, or they're not motivated to try. So to break through that growth ceiling, you often need to stop obsessing about adding more features and start obsessively optimizing the member journey, the customer experience. You have to meticulously map out every single step of that customer's experience, especially from the moment they sign the contract through, say, the crucial first 90 days. Key areas to optimize usually include things like clearer, more compelling, and really consistent communication at every single touch point. This often means better onboarding processes, maybe short, focused explainer videos for key features, and finding the right mix of motivation, like celebrating small wins and explanation to ensure they truly understand the value they are already receiving from you.
Okay, so it's much more about making the value they already paid for extremely easy to access, understand, and actually use, rather than just burying them under a constant avalanche of new stuff they might not need or want. That really shifts the accountability, doesn't it? Less on the product team to just build more, and more onto the communication, onboarding, and customer success teams.
Exactly. It connects the promise made during the sales process right through to the customer success process, delivering on that promise, which is exactly where that accountability should reside for retention.
Makes perfect sense. Finally, let's turn the lens onto leadership for a moment. The CEO, the VP of sales, they need to be deeply connected to the trenches, as you said, to support this whole specialized machine we've described. How do they coach effectively and, maybe more importantly, diagnose problems accurately when, say, the DLER starts to slip or a specific AE keeps missing their targets?
Yeah, leadership has a critical role here. And the first thing they must do is avoid the knee-jerk reaction of simply assuming poor performance is due to laziness or lack of effort. That's rarely the whole story. When performance dips, the leader's primary job is actually to become a diagnostician. They need to figure out the real root cause. They must use structured root cause analysis to get past the surface symptoms.
And the best tool for that kind of structured digging is often the 5 whys method, right? Let's make this really concrete. Can you walk us through applying the 5 whys to a specialized sales scenario, like that AE missing deals?
Okay, absolutely. Let's use an example of an account executive who keeps losing deals relatively late in the sales cycle, deals that looked promising. So why #1? Why did the AE lose the deal? Okay, because the prospect didn't see the full value proposition clearly enough and eventually walked away. Why hashtag 2? Why didn't the prospect see the full value? Well, digging deeper, it seems the AE focused too much on product features and didn't effectively connect them back to the high-level business pain we discussed. Why hashtag 3? Why did the AE focus mostly on features? Maybe because they lack a deep, practical understanding of that specific client's operational expenses or the nuances of their particular industry. Why hashtag 4? Why do they lack that deep industry understanding? Thinking back, maybe because we rushed their initial ramp-up process. They didn't actually complete that mandatory rotation with the account management team where they talked to existing clients in that space. Why hashtag 5? Why was that crucial rotation skipped? Okay, the root cause might be that the VP of sales pressured the hiring manager to get that AE selling full-time immediately, trying to hit an arbitrary quarterly quota number. See how the focus shifted. The root problem isn't really the AE's specific action in that one deal, focusing on features. It's actually revealed a systemic organizational problem rush training driven by unrealistic quota pressure from above. The 5 whys helps you clearly distinguish between a performance weakness that's maybe due to a lack of experience or training, which is fixable, from a potential lack of inherent ability or fit for the role, which might not be.
That is such a critical distinction. The manager's job then becomes fixing the system, like the onboarding process or quota setting, not just blaming or firing the individual person caught in it.
Exactly right. And this ties into the idea that managers need to optimize the efficiency of their coaching. Success as a manager isn't really measured by how many hours you spend coaching someone. It's measured by how quickly and accurately you can diagnose the root issues, like we just did, and then customize a specific targeted coaching plan in a time-efficient manner. Good managers are effective diagnosticians who can apply the right fix quickly and then move on to the next challenge. Hashtag outro.
Wow. This has been a true deep dive into the real mechanics of sustainable growth. Not just theory, but the actual nuts and bolts. We've clearly established that predictable scale isn't magic. It's achieved by rigorously replacing that generic hopeful activity with specialized, separate systems, particularly treating outbound prospecting as its own highly disciplined engine. And we build teams staffed with real business experts, people who focus on selling the dream, the outcome, not just the product features.
And crucially, we underpin all of that structure by rigorously measuring the actual financial output. Using metrics that matter, like ACV goals tied to compensation, focusing on gross margin, using those efficiency ratios like DLR and MLR, moving far beyond just tracking simple revenue, or worse, just activity. But, this kind of rigorous structure, this commitment to specialization and measurement, it's only truly possible if you and your organization adopt the right internal belief system, which really comes down to the mindset of growth.
That's interesting. Tell us a bit more about connecting this very tactical, structural stuff we discussed to that internal belief system, that mindset.
Well, think about it. When you inevitably face the failures, the criticism, or just the setbacks that always come when you try to implement new systems like these, maybe your DLER ratio dips unexpectedly, or a new SDR team struggles initially to hit that 70% outbound sourcing goal we mentioned. In those moments, you have to recognize your fixed mindset triggers kicking in. That fixed mindset, it's that little voice inside that fears exposing deficiencies. It's the voice that tells you to maybe play it safe, opt for the easy, predictable success over potentially messy, hard-won growth. The goal, the practice really, is to consciously choose a growth mindset instead. To see those challenges, those failures, not as indictments of your ability, but simply as valuable opportunities to learn, adapt, and develop your system further. You have to fundamentally understand and believe that you have the power to change your beliefs about yourself and your capabilities, your team's capabilities too.
So you actively choose the identity that actually enables the growth you're seeking.
You do. Your identity, maybe you frame it as being a perpetual learning machine or building a constantly improving system. That identity isn't set in stone. You forge that identity day by day with the habits you choose and the decisions you make, especially when things get tough. That willingness to learn, to adapt, to be wrong sometimes, and to continually refine your specialized, measurable system, that's what ultimately makes predictable growth not just possible, but maybe even inevitable over time.
We've certainly laid out the blueprint today for building that specialized, measurable revenue machine. A lot to think about.
Definitely. So maybe here is a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to take away and mull over. Given the power we've discussed today of specialization and focusing on real financial metrics like DLER or ACV goals, think about your own daily work, your own pipeline right now. What is one specific activity that you or your team are currently measuring, mostly based on busyness as a proxy for productivity? Maybe it's the number of emails sent or calls made or meetings booked without qualification. Find just one, and then ask yourself, how could you potentially redesign a single, simple financial metric, maybe a rough DLER calculation for a project or a contribution margin goal for a certain type of lead, to quantify the actual financial contribution of that activity to your business? Just start there, pick one thing, and watch how quickly your focus and maybe your results begin to shift from just effort to measurable, valuable output.